You are. What?
Cool. All right. Welcome to the Jitoc meeting. This is our noon meeting, hopefully the only one of the day for 11/25, 2024. As our agenda says, we've got a quick thing here for a memo on the judiciary budget. And then we will get into the ERP project. Yes, Rep. Sevilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would it be possible to have folks introduce themselves around the room so that I'm aware of who's in the room? Thank
Sure,
you.
yeah. I'll start. Seth Chase, the chair from Colchester.
Randy Brock, Vice Chair from Swanton.
Rep. Monique Priestley, Bradford.
Chad Jordan, we're with the bird implementation vendor.
Okay.
Amy Donovan with the preferred implementation vendor.
Justin Johnson, lobbyist for MMR, representing the preferred implementation.
Joseph Paquin, Judicial IT.
Catherine Benham, Joint Fiscal Office.
Steve Whitaker.
Lisa Gobb, an IT consultant for JFL.
Rick Sable, Office of Legislative Counsel.
Emily Byrne, Joint Fiscal Office. Senator Irene Renner. Senate North.
Thank you. And Sarah, feel free to come on in. We were just doing quick say again.
We heard it was packed in here. That's why we haven't come in. So.
Okay.
Come in?
Up to you if you want to find a seat, or we should be done with the first part fairly short order.
Okay, that's good.
Okay. Just to remind folks, last time we got together, Judiciary had asked for us to help with the money committees as far as setting up their budget for next year. Oh, we're
Still good.
We're good?
Yeah.
Okay. So there was a memo from Judiciary to our committee. And my proposal is a brief cover sheet for that says basically to the money committees that they've got it right, and we advise that they follow the judiciary request. So at the moment, the memo is written under my name. I would like for it to come from the committee if folks are comfortable. So am I allowed to propose a vote, or does somebody else have to?
What's the question?
Am I allowed to propose a vote, or does somebody else have to?
I believe you have to be seconded, but I believe you can go ahead.
So somebody will, hopefully. But is there any questions, comments, or concerns about the memo, or what I'm?
Yeah, I was gonna wait till you'd have a motion on the floor and then we discuss it, but whatever order.
Let's discuss first, and then we'll know how to phrase the motion.
So this is a memo that you received in June. This is the first time I'm seeing it. Maybe other people saw it before now. I find it curious that having separate support from ADS is saving so much money for the judicial branch. And I wonder, does that point to the need for an audit of ADS? I mean, are we not spending money properly such that it encourages departments to go it on their own for IT support? I have a huge concern with what this shows me.
Okay.
As a peripheral issue, but it also makes me wonder, are we looking at the larger picture in a way that makes sense for taxpayers? Because it's all about affordability, right? And so to see the judicial branch has found a way to save money, we might want to tell other departments about that. Secondly, I wonder if we need to be thinking about alternative sources of revenue that are not regressive, like traffic tickets. I'm sorry to see that the revenue has dropped, but I think there should be some exploration of other revenue sources, and maybe they can share with us what those are that they've looked into that haven't been implemented yet, perhaps.
Okay. Joe, would you be willing to take a seat, introduce yourself and speak to those questions, please?
Hello, Joe Piquin. I am the Director for Infrastructure for the Judiciary IT Department. I can't particularly answer the first question for you. We have seen just an increase for us in the ability to perform our jobs. And, you know, if there is an outage, our teams are willing to work through the night to get things done, which we haven't had any significant outages. But we were able to control our destiny per se a little bit more by being our own. I do agree that this is a regressive funding modality for funding judicial IT. It is a statute or a rule in establishing the tech fund with this funding mechanism. We haven't explored other funding avenues, but we are open to exploring it. I know that this has been brought up for at least the last several fiscal years to the Committee on Ways and Means by our finance department that we need another funding source. And we also have brought this up last budget session to say, hey, we have a budget gap of estimated about $3 million by fiscal year 2028 with the way that traffic ticket funding and fees are going. I don't know if that particularly answers your question, Senator.
That's helpful. I'm not
Yeah,
sure part of what happened on those committees, because I
Yeah,
sat on
yeah.
other committees, but
absolutely. Yeah. Questions?
Are folks ready to take a position on the memo, the cover sheet for the memo?
Feel comfortable enough to take a position? And are we sufficiently knowledgeable about what's being asked in the mechanism, or is this something that is more appropriate for a committee that has the time to delve into the budget issues, which is what our budget committees are designed to do?
This would be recommending to them, the budget committees that from the IT perspective, this is a good path forward. It would be up to the money committees to determine if it's a good financial decision.
Like, yeah, but what we're saying essentially here is that for an IT perspective, an IT security perspective, the judiciary needs more money.
Yep.
And we're saying that, and that it's insufficient to do the job, but it's up to them. What I mean is the finance committee and Ways and Means determine in the priority of things that this is something that they should do. Right? Fair statement?
That's how I would understand it, yes.
Question is, when we're making a determined decision, I guess I probably want to reread this again, say if that's all we're saying, that there's insufficient funds to do what needs to be done in our assessment, based on particularly in terms of security issues. And I think that's what judiciary is asking us to do. Is that correct?
Right.
And not necessarily that in the grand scheme of things that budget committees are going to agree with that conclusion because they have to look at other priorities that we have not.
Correct. So I would propose that we would submit this memo that's on our page under my name as a committee rather than coming from me individually. Rep. Sibilia, yes, please.
What's the consequence of us not sending this memo?
Basically, the judiciary request would have less significance and cachet to the budget committees. This is Jitoc advocating on behalf of judiciary to get the funding that they need for their IT and security projects, and reliable funding at that.
I think I'm okay. And we have taken no testimony from
This is kind of a throwback to this summer when we met in June. I think was when judiciary made the request of us. This is the first meeting since then. So this is the first opportunity we've had to take an official position on it.
Okay. And did ADS weigh in June? I'm trying to remind myself here.
Say again, please.
Did ADS weigh in June? Trying to remind myself of this.
I don't recall. Joe, do you remember if ADS had a position on this?
I don't think they took a position because we are operating independently at the moment.
Could we ask to have them back in a December meeting so that we actually have input from both sides?
I guess my position would be that this, as an independent branch of government, would not be dependent on ADS's opinion. This would be the judicial branch making a request. Is that fair? Rep. Sibilia?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And also that the money committees will have to balance the needs of all three branches of government in terms of IT. And so how have we considered that, or are we not?
We are not. We are saying that this is an important thing for them to consider, and they go through their usual process of investigating everything thoroughly.
And so I know that in the past, we have had discussions on this committee about kind of uniform standards across all of government. We don't have those in place. We've also encouraged collaboration across, and so I understand this is a unique IT project that is, and IT needs. I am a little concerned about considering it out of balance across state government. And also, there is a need for judiciary to have a secure system. So may I ask, Mr. Chair, are the three branches IT leads meeting? And if so, when was the last meeting?
Joe, can you speak to that?
Yeah, the last meeting, it's been quite a while. We have not been meeting on a regular cadence. I have been in more contact with the legislative IT folks, just from a general collaboration because we're two smaller branches of government. But to answer your question, Representative, no.
So I guess I am wondering about whether or not, in addition to the money committees having this, if this perhaps should also be referred to the government operations committees, perhaps.
I think that might be a separate question, because in order to come up with that would essentially be its own legislation. And unless somebody has a different opinion on it, I feel like the statute that creates a meeting process for the three branches would be independent of the funding for the IT projects and security systems.
So my suggestion is asking for the government operations committees to weigh in on the yeah, to the money committees.
Okay.
Can Rep. Sibilia, I just want to make sure I clarify, this $3 million budget deficit that we have is for general operating funds for our tech budget. When we look at that, it costs just under $4 million to operate our entire IT department. And if we look at a per person ratio, we are significantly undervalued with that. So.
I share some of Representative Sibilia's concerns in that we don't typically go into the money recommendations in detail. We're called upon from time to time to look at a particular project or expenditure and in effect pass an approval vote of something that's presented to us as with the other matter today based on a technical review. But I don't recall a precedent where we've essentially asked some organization or department or part of government to actually expend funds in relation to a particular department within one of the agencies. I would be much more comfortable with saying that we have concerns as we review the general aspects of funding in a particular area, of asking the committees of jurisdiction to perhaps closely review whether or not the allocation of funds to do the things that we're requesting the agency to do is adequate and has been carefully thought through. But I think it really is a matter for the committee of jurisdiction. And I'm just very concerned about our putting our finger on the levers of funding when we have done no thorough review of that at all. And so that makes me very, very uncomfortable.
Heard?
Is there a way, Mr. Chair?
Please.
Is there a way to, I'm trying to call the memo up. Is there a way to modify this agenda or this memo in such a way that, oh, I'm sorry, I was not looking at your memo. I was looking at the request from judiciary.
The short answer is yes. If there are changes that the committee would like to make to the cover sheet I propose, I think I would ask Rick if he would be able to make some of those changes on the fly, and then we could circle back to this later in this meeting. Rick, would that be feasible? Laura? Rep. Civilian?
Yes, so I wonder about adding in, this committee recommends that the General Assembly permanently support the judiciary's tech fund. That's a bold statement. I would say, that, the relevant committees consider how to permanently support the judiciary's tech fund, period. That would be my suggestion, and happy to hear improvements or why that doesn't work.
From my part, the reason why I made it a strong statement is because I feel like it's a strong thing that we do need to support permanently going forward, with the knowledge and understanding that we can't obligate future legislatures. So any discussion of permanent is only, good for 2 years. But I'm happy to use your phrase if that makes folks more comfortable.
The things that are important to me, Mr. Chair, are not identifying the general fund and also identifying that we would like the committees of jurisdiction to weigh in.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd agree.
I think we could certainly say that based upon the limited review that we've done, we have concerns as to regarding the adequacy of funding to do these things. And we recommend that the committees of jurisdiction look at this carefully and assess it and make a determination with that in mind.
Okay. If we made those changes, folks feel comfortable with that? And seeing general nods. Rick, does that give you enough to modify?
Can I read what I've typed?
Please.
Okay. It's just the one sentence, Repsibilia, that the first to second paragraph. This committee recommends that the committees of jurisdiction consider this request carefully and consider supporting the judiciary's tech fund. Do you want to say through the general fund, or do you not want to include
I
that?
think she said how to support.
She said-
How to support?
Yeah.
Yes.
So not consider supporting, but how to support.
Yes.
Okay.
Permanently, I think the chair has asked it for that word to be in. I don't want to include the general fund, and I do want to include committees of jurisdiction, which I consider to be GovOps for sure, at a minimum.
And Joe, does that sound like it would meet your ask?
Yeah, it definitely does. And, I agree, Rep. Sibilia, it could be other funding models. It could be increasing the current fees with the regressive model that we have. It could be something.
I'm gonna share my screen so everyone can see it.
Yeah, if that would preclude us from having to like come back to it at the end, that works for me.
All about efficiency. Here. Change the subject.
Oh, and the from should
Yeah,
be.
the from, if approved, the from would be from the Jitoc as a whole.
So I just changed the sentence here. Everything else is the same.
Can you zoom in a little bit more?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that determine is good.
I'm comfortable
Yeah,
with that.
good.
I'm seeing either nods or.
I wonder if this incorporates what Senator Brock was saying about for our limited review.
That's in the letter.
Mm.
The letter did request general funds allocation, correct? Joe, do you remember?
That is. Yeah, it was a request for general funds.
And this cover sheet would modify that slightly
Right.
by saying, consider how to.
You may add chairs of government operations at the top.
Oh, yes, please.
If we end up having like a tech committee, then does that,
They may be asked to weigh in also, but I think this is less about the technology itself and more about the,
operations? Okay.
yeah.
The adequacy of funding.
Yeah.
Okay.
For that particular purpose.
Okay. Cool. So, I'd like to propose we approve this memo as, or this cover sheet as coming from the committee as a whole.
Second.
Second. Any other questions? Rep. Sibilia, your picture is very small. I can't tell if you've got your hand up or not. Are you okay moving forward?
I am. I really appreciate the conversation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Senator Brock,
Yes.
Representative Priestley.
Yes.
Representative Sibilia.
Yes.
Senator Weeks is not with us, correct? Senator Renner
Yes.
and myself, yes. Perfect. Thank you. So that puts this issue to bed, and next we will get into the ERP system.
Thank you all.
Joe? So before we start, what I'd like to do is ask Rick to give us a brief review of what our options and obligations are here.
We have some more chairs coming. I just want to kind of help. So
Okay.
a little bit. Just a check.
What's your emergency? Okay. I feel like I'm shivering.
Oops.
Okay, ready? All right. Rick Sagel, Office of Legislative Counsel. Thanks for having me, Mr. Chair. So the reason why Jitoc is involved in this part of the process is because of Act 185 passed in 2022. I'm in E105.2. And I'll just kind of read the language here because it's pretty short and sweet and to the point. In fiscal 2023, the following expenditures are authorized from the Tech Modern Special Fund to the projects described in this section. The sum of 11.8 million for enterprise resource planning, ERP, system upgrade of core statewide financial accounting system and integration with the Vermont Department of Labor and the Agency of Transportation Financial Systems. I could go on, but this is the reason why you're here today. A1. If you go to subsection B, the expenditures authorized in A1 of the section shall only be released following approval by Jitoc, the Joint Information Technology Committee, upon a review of the following documentation as provided by the Agency of Digital Services, the Agency of Administration, and the Joint Fiscal Office's IT consultant. 1, adequacy of departmental readiness. 2, the responsiveness of requests for proposals. And 3, results of the independent review. So your committee is charged with kind of a thumbs up or thumbs down on the specific 11.8 million that has already been appropriated by the General Assembly and is now being held by Jitoc until release. So those are your two options. You can approve it, you can disapprove it. And if you have questions, I can answer them about the language, but that's shortened to the point.
Any questions for legislative counsel? Representative Sibilia, are you still with us?
I am eating my lunch and sparing you all the gory details.
That's totally okay. Just wanted to make sure that we were okay moving forward. Cool. Thank you, Rick.
I'll hang around if you have questions.
Please. And next we have Emily and Lisa from JFO. You want to come up together or individually or?
I'll come up and then I'll just stay there since it's a tight squeeze.
Yeah.
I was just gonna do a quick intro just to sort of level set sort of where we are, what we're talking about, from JFO's perspective. So Emily Byrne, deputy from the Joint Fiscal Office. So Lisa will present her review of the project, the Enterprise Resource Planning Project, the ERP. As Rick said, you've got the authority to release the $11.8 million that was appropriated. This is going to be a big and expensive undertaking. I think we just need to say that out loud. It's going to take several years to do that, to do this project. It has the potential to cost the state tens of millions of dollars at the end of the day. And it's going to touch every corner of state government, frankly. It's going to, it's going to hit things, including but not limited to, employee compensation and benefits, financial analysis, the ability to record financial information, and the role that, the legislative, the judiciary, the executive branch are going to have, the role that auditors are going to, how auditors are going to be able to access that information about the state, federal, and in the auditor's office. One thing that made this particularly challenging was sort of the procurement process around this project. And Lisa will explain in more detail when she gets into her report, but because procurement was sort of atypical, gather and there's business requirements and gap analysis that's yet to be completed, it was hard to work on this review and complete a sort of detailed estimate of project costs, because there are things that just aren't known yet and that there's still work to be done. So to that end, the report that Lisa has put together suggests some options for oversight from the General Assembly as this project moves forward, as additional appropriations are requested, places to ask for feedback and get more information from the executive branch. There will be a need for additional appropriation, and it's important that the legislature sort of pay attention to how things are moving forward when it's time to release the funds. That's sort of where we're at. I'll let Lisa jump right into her report from there, unless you have questions for me specifically, which probably not this.
Not seeing any.
Thank you. It's nice to see you all again.
Hold chairs at all before Lisa gets started.
You get a one more chair. Sit on them. Okay, for the record, my name is Lisa Govin. I'm the IT consultant with JFO.
I thought I'd structure my conversation around specific areas to start and then see if you had some questions. I'm very much aware that the state hasn't had an opportunity to address you, so I want to make sure I'm careful with my time while also answering all your questions. So I thought I'd start with just how I approach the review, then move into my major findings, which, I identified theme areas after I had gone through all of the information, discuss some of my concerns, and then check in with you on whether you'd like some more detail around the specific review areas that I had assessed. So I'll start with that. So as you know, I have a standard template for reviewing projects. I won't go through all those details. You're fully aware of what those are. I also reviewed the CIO's independent review. If you recall, when we met, when we first started discussing the ERP project in committees, we discussed the need to make sure that we looked at it in a holistic way. So all of the expenses associated with the project. So this project would replace 5 different systems for state government: the vision, the HR, the budget, and then STARS and FARS in the at AOT and the Department of Labor. So when you're replacing systems, you have areas that can be implemented using the new system, which would be Workday, and then there may be gaps in those systems. So we had decided that we would look at those particular gap areas in addition to not just implementing an ERP system. So all the costs associated with that. When I looked at the independent review was focused on the ERP implementation, not the gap areas associated with implementing these systems. So how, what do you do if you find gaps in STARS and FARS and all of that? And how do you actually manage and track those changes and ensure you collect all of those changes? So it didn't review that. There were also different documents that were important to the project that weren't included in the independent review. They didn't have access to it, and this was cited in the document itself, particularly the Workday contracts and the original RFP that was done by the National Association of State Procurement Officials. And this was the unconventional procurement process, where it's not unusual for the state to use that particular organization's contract for commodities, things that are sort of, you're purchasing, a set thing, versus an implementation of an enterprise information system, where you would want to go through and do all your functional requirements. So because that was missing, the independent reviewer vendor, didn't have a chance to assess how the actual RFP for that association was done and what the implications for that might be. Although, to their credit, at the end of the independent review, they actually said, although we didn't have access to these documents, here's what we would have looked at if we had. So there was a lot of good information in the independent review related to that. But again, I felt the need that I had to go in a bit deeper. There were also parts of the, this review was done in the February-March timeframe, and the actual draft for the preferred implementation vendor was at a pretty early stage. I did a comparison later on of the differences between that contract that the independent reviewer had access to and the final contract, which was completed around the 1st of October. And there were significant differences to those contracts. So the independent reviewer didn't have all of that information. The schedule wasn't in as part of the contract there at all. And of course, the cost areas changed, and there was lots of changes in the actual scope of work for the preferred implementation vendor. So the other issues were, when we're looking at comparison to other states, they were just things like they said the pricing was comparable, but they really didn't provide information. And many of the states that they used, they had different types of projects that were being implemented. Like Washington State, for example, they're really replacing legacy financial systems in almost every department as part of their project. So it's really not really a level comparison. So there were other things. But those were the main review areas areas in regards to the independent review that I felt the need that I had to dive deeper into the project than what I normally would. And that's what I did. So,
So can you hold on a second?
sure.
We're still good.
Okay.
Okay.
But
All right. So in addition to, after this, I did dive deeper into the documents, including all the contract documents with Workday. I had a lot of conversations that I typically don't. I talked to the preferred implementation vendor over the summer. I also talked to Workday over the summer. I'll get more into those conversations. I also had, based on, I posed questions to the states and I received responses. Some of them did, some of the responses eliminated concerns that just didn't move forward, and others, in a way where I think some of it, we were talking past each other a little bit. So I followed up on those. I had a conversation with the Cloud Security Alliance, which they're a nonprofit that deals with cloud security frameworks, issues around security. Matter of fact, when the National Institute of Standards and Technology were looking at the need for cloud security standards, they contacted this organization. I really felt it was important to talk to them because of some of the planning around post-implementation plans for this project. And when I spoke to them generally about cloud services systems, not this particular project. And some of my findings after talking to them are in my report. So does anybody have any question on why I decided to go in deeper on this project? Okay. So getting into some of the major challenges that I identified, and this was at the beginning of my report, which were the issues that came up from the unusual selection process. Emily described a lot of it, that it just was atypical. Normally you would, through an RFP process, you're identifying your major functional requirements. And through that process, you're doing a gap analysis of what your requirements are, and then what does the system do. So these weren't done early on. And some of these challenges that I've identified, you're going to find kind of root causes and then outcomes of those causes. So I think a root cause was the not going through the typical process of evaluating vendors against specific requirements. And then sort of the implications of those. For instance, stars and FARs, and this was noted in the independent review, they identified other states that had replaced those systems independently, not through the financial system. And those came in around $25 to $30 million each. So not having, that gap analysis that shows what the difference were and how Workday can meet those, to me, adds a risk to it. In addition, during a conversation, a Workday demo that was done, I think it was in June, Workday offered up that, yes, they had implemented Workday at the Iowa Department of Transportation, which is, they have a FARS, their own STARS requirement. But that department didn't choose to use Workday to replace that system. So that makes me wonder why. I mean, maybe there's another reason they just didn't want to replace that system. So there are some questions, and I think that are just more risks. So also, not having these requirements really required the vendor to do a lot of work, the preferred implementation vendor, to develop their contract. Because without having solid requirements of, for example, exactly, I'm trying to think of it, they had to box it, like without knowing the exact number of reports the state had, they said, we'll develop this many reports, those types of things. So that was another issue. It is, I feel like I get to know vendors through their contracts, and I really like the contract, and I did speak with the vendor over the summer, and they were very helpful. I think they're highly qualified to implement a system like this. But like I said in the beginning of my report, this isn't an assessment of Workday or the preferred implementation vendor, but the state's readiness to adapt this. But I think they did a great job. But remember, they're protecting, as they should, their own interests and their own margins by participating in this project. And so, for instance, the box number of attempts at a data migration were included in the contract. So it leaves, without the state knowing for sure what their requirements are, we don't know how vulnerable they are to change requests and how much that might grow. But I definitely appreciate the thoroughness of the vendor. But that's an ongoing risk. Also, oh, and I didn't mention this, around the independent review, but they did not review the business process re-engineering vendor contract at all because it didn't exist at that time. I never did get that contract because it wasn't at a level that was ready for review. I completed my review, but I think it was either the last day of August, first day of September. And then it went into JFO. It was around mid-November where the state mentioned to me that they had that contract that was ready if I wanted to review it, but my report was done at that point, and the issues that were in it kind of stand on their own. Let's see. Oh, the other issue around the lack of, documentation is the fact that there's no detailed plans for the data lake, which is the data archive. So that's that 6th area of the scope of work. The current contract has 2 years of data being migrated into Workday through the implementation plan. I know that, I ran into a business manager over the summer and I said, if the state puts 2 years of data in a finance system, is that sufficient? And they said, well, our grants are almost all longer than that in that time frame. So you need a way to do reporting on grants. So because of this, you can see, and I created in one of my appendix, kind of the business case for possibly needing more years of data within the system. And so that's an issue. So with the data lake, I asked for kind of what their plans were and did they have a project plan for the data lake work and what that meant. And the state at that time, what they sent me was an example of how they would approach it based on a vendor scope of work of a project over at AHS. So I didn't see a plan that was in existence for implementing the data lake. And I would ask, the state to carefully consider what are the implications for not having that data archive up and running by the time you go live with Workday. For example, if when I started looking at the technology of a data lake, it's a little different than data warehousing. It's a lot cheaper to implement because it doesn't require you entail what they call schema work, which is really doing your data models and like in a data warehouse where you set tables up intentionally for speed of reporting and it's all organized, the security's built in. And so the data lakes that I was looking at when I looked at the industry standard for it, it was describing a tool that really required data analysts to access the data. And so I would suggest that the business really reassess whether or not this will meet their needs and does, or are we talking past each other again on what the expectations are for accessing the data long-term. But I did a data warehousing project and those are big projects and there's a lot of data. So, and you're talking not just taking all the data and migrating out, but if you need to link it to the data and the data models change within the actual data warehouse, it gets complicated. Do you transform that data in the data archive, and how do you control access if you haven't gone through the data classifications, data modeling, all of that, and what are the plans to do that? That is a big project, and you're talking about 5 systems, and how much data do you actually have to move over and have access to? So, so that was a big concern. And then, getting into the lack of adherence to my third challenge was the Workday recommendations, and it relates to tenants. Now, this was challenging for me, and this was I pursued this based on the independent review and the vendor comments in that document about, questioning tenants, and they didn't seem to, the information they were seeing didn't seem to jive with what they were seeing in the preferred implementation vendors.
Second, Lisa, third speaker is not working. Please reconnect and restart speaker.
If this thing has a screw,
I think
it's still broadcasting fine.
Okay.
Yes.
Am I okay?
Can we double check and make sure we've got audio on the YouTube? Hold up. Sorry, please hold. The message has gone away now, so I think we're safe. Or
Are we ready yet or no?
I think so. It's still showing live and
Okay.
speaker warning is no longer active.
Our IT team is monitoring too, so I didn't cut them.
Split it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so this, I can start then, right? Okay, so this relates to tenants and what they purchase. And I did talk to Workday about this and confirm my understanding. So as the state, a tenant, you can think of it kind of like it's an environment, how in the client service world, you'd hear about development, production, test, those types of environments. Now, this is different because it's a cloud services and Vermont doesn't have its own implementation of that. So they share a database with other clients. So the tenant is referred to what they're purchasing, but it's also referred to as, the word's also used to refer to the types of, think of it as an environment, like a pseudo environment within that implementation. So when you're in implementation mode, based on what Vermont purchased, they have, I think, 6 different environments that they have access to that will help them, that they can develop in as they're implementing the system. When the system goes live, according to Workday, the state will have a production tenant, a sandbox tenant, and a preview tenant. The sandbox tenant, because it's cloud service and all the clients on the same model, it's updated every week, but you can defer it to like 3 weeks. So that's something if you want to do quick changes. And believe me, this is important or I wouldn't bore you with it. For quick changes, the preview tenant is for when a new version is coming out, because everybody gets the same version. You don't get to, opt out of a upgrade with the Workday, with the cloud environment. So the preview environment is really meant just like that, to preview what the upcoming version is going to have, and then to figure out in that time frame how you will use that new piece, or if you will use that new piece. So it's a security issue, and because Vermont has, at least in the version of the contract I looked at that point, 150 known integration points. And Workday does recommend that when you have multiple integrations, that you purchase an implementation tenant. So that's sort of like your development tenant that's reserved for you for those developments. So it's backed up and everything over time. And so I've raised this because it's a concern. Luckily, it's one that could be remedied. They could purchase an implementation tenant once they go live and have this. And according to Workday, they could purchase it for a short period, a long period of time. But one of the interesting notes that after talking to the Cloud Security Alliance is they were saying, well, I was asking about kind of if you didn't have one, what could be the implications of that, not having an implementation tenant. And they said, well, if it's related to finance, for example, if it's tied into the ACH system, they have requirements and standards for certain practices, including having test environments. So when you have a new system integrating that had a payment option, like the Department of Education issues automatic payments for state aid, for education and batch, that there would be an environment to test those and to make sure they're working properly. So if, you could risk your participation in a system like that by not meeting their standards. So there's other things that could come into play. So I'm mentioning it because the security concerns related to it. It just, hopefully it can be, that would be something that could be mitigated. So getting into my specific concerns related to this. And the state and I are not on the same page. They disagree with my conclusions, and I want to make sure I give them adequate time to speak to that. We come from different work experiences, and there's any number of reasons why we could have different interpretations of this, but my responsibility is to this committee and to advise based on what I see, and that's what I'm doing. They really are, in my opinion, the state, they're focused on implementing an ERP system, and I can totally understand why. It would be such a vast improvement. And in the demo, after the demo that Workday provided, there were many people across the state that were very excited about the possibilities and the improvements that this would show them. But we have to consider it's not just, we're not a brand new organization. We have to consider the downstream impacts of the other systems that we're replacing and whether or not we're able to meet all the business needs. And, if we can do that in a fiscally responsible way. In addition to the danger of the large possible large amount of change orders and, the implications of starting a project without knowing whether stars and FARs could be implemented, and the issues around the data archive. If the state discovers that, using the Workday reporting tool and linking to the outside data won't work, that's a huge project in itself. And what happens if the archive data isn't available in the way the business needs it at go live? What will happen? Could that delay the launch of the new system? So, when I think about, I worry about the gap, but I also worry about the possibility if there are issues that aren't discovered until it's time to test, and that's when the business folks start to see where the gaps are. And that's a danger in a project like this. Remember, the vendor is going to implement based on the requirements that are shared with them. The states has stated that at the end of the requirements phase of the preferred implementation vendors contracts, they'll be able to answer these questions. And that's what they have said to me, all these, around where the gaps are, where everything is. But I'm not sure that the preferred implementation vendor is going to do a complete analysis of stars and FARs and how they were implemented and identify where those gaps are. And if they're not doing it, who's tracking that? Are we requiring the business people that are coming into these requirement sessions without a formal as-is analysis in their hands to just know where the gaps might be so they can identify them? So, that's where I see the risks. And that's where my concerns are. But around other issues related to this, it's my opinion that the independent review was done too early in order, and it didn't have the proper scope. I also have questions on, that the committee should probably look at further on if there needs to be. We need to really reconsider how flexible we are before we review a project too, in terms of what information we need available. Because, here we had a lot of people working on this project at the state for a very long time, in the implementation vendor's time, without having all the information we needed to share, to really make a decision on whether we should allocate funds for it. And I'm not sure that we have the information that we need now when it's time to approve it. And yet they have put a lot of work in, and they see the value of what this could mean for the state. And yet we're here talking about the risks that we see. So that's my quick review. Did you guys have any questions based on reviewing my report, or
Yeah, what I'd like to do is give ADS the opportunity to give their rebuttal, as it were. And if there's any quick clarifying questions for JFO first, then happy to do those. But let's save the discussion for after ADS, if that's all right. I'm seeing nods.
Okay.
Any clarifying questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary, would you like to both come up together?
Great.
Is everybody gathering around the table?
We use
Please. Couple chairs if needed.
So for the record, I'm Denise Riley Hughes, Secretary for Agency of Digital Services. I'm the state CIO. And I'm Sarah Clark. I am the Secretary of Administration. As of last Monday, I'm no longer interim secretary, so I'm pleased to be here as the permanent Secretary of Administration.
Congratulations.
Thank you for having us. And let me start by saying thank you to committee members for meeting this week. I know it's a holiday week. We believed it was really important that we convene this committee to provide you with an update on the work that has been going on now in earnest, really over the last 6 months. But as everyone knows, it's been going on for a lot longer than that, 3 years. And so why we thought it was critical to come to the committee is that we are on the cusp of starting this implementation. It has been scheduled to start for a long time now on December 1st, which, as you know, is just this Sunday. And so we thought before we executed contracts and began this work in earnest, that it was important that we come to the committee and update you on our progress, as well as really seek the release of the appropriation. And we'll talk a little bit more about, we're here today about the $11.8 million appropriation that was originally established for phase 2 of the project, which is focused on the financials and accounting. But there, as the committee is aware, there is an earlier appropriation that was originally $12.8 million to the Agency of Administration. That's for phase 1 of the project, which is the human capital management and budgeting components. And so in all, we have about $24 million has been appropriated to this project. And we've been doing a lot of really great work in partnership. So I wanted to give that context and thank you for meeting on what is a busy time. So the Enterprise Resource Planning Project will be transformational to the state of Vermont and the employees that do the hard work for this great state. It's part of our commitment to modernizing our operations. We are proposing to transition from current on-premises ERP system to a new cloud-based ERP system. Workday is our selected product. This transformation is designed to streamline human resources, payroll, budgeting, and financial processes. Our goal is to provide state employees with a more efficient, secure, and modern system. Our future vision for our ERP system is to allow a true enterprise system, which means we are fully integrated, agile, and secure. As it is today, our systems, though they are integrated, or they connect, they're not integrated. And so even though they are critical to each other, let's say payroll and accounting, they are connected, not integrated. And so we don't have this fully integrated enterprise system. This future system will allow us to streamline operations for seamless alignment across the state. As you know, this enterprise system really provides the core foundation of state government, and it is critical to maintaining and achieving effective operations. I know a lot of you know me. I've spent almost 21 years now in state government in a financial capacity, and I can see a future where we are more effective and efficient by the use of this new system. And some of the things that I spent a career doing in order to meet the needs of the state from, for example, monitoring the financial expenditures of a department to make sure that you're living within your budget. Right now is a series of manual spreadsheets across state government. This system in the future will provide an integrated enterprise manner of looking at these financials with not even a click of a button. It'll be on my screen when I log in. That's the future.
So we wanted to cover a little bit about project methodology because we are employing the approach that has been tried and true through our, we call it EPMO, but our Enterprise Portfolio Management Office, which we manage all projects across the state. And this is their model, which is a well-adopted PM project management methodology and model. We blend waterfowl and agile into a more adaptive process to meet the needs of different projects and processes. I put a link down the bottom of the document so that you're able to go and look at what that is, because we also link out to the status of all active projects on this site as well, so that it's transparent and open. And what you'll see is we've spent the first 3 phases over the last few years going through this effort. And when we start in the execution phase, I think that you'll find as we provide more information on further pages, is that there's a lot of front-end planning that goes in before we start configuring anything, along with designing, testing, and reviewing. And we're going to go through that loop. I think there's eight release modules that we end up doing through the phase of the implementation project, which is what we're talking about here is the implementation. And then we go to launch. What you're seeing here is where the EPMO in the state of Vermont is engaged. I think that what you'll find is that there is a volume of effort that happens on the front end of that, along with post-launch. So now you start talking about ongoing operations. And so that's where you won't see that in the project methodology, because EPMO disengages at that point.
I prefer, in case anybody wasn't sure, we're reviewing a document that was posted to our website. I'd rather do here in case Rep. Spillia has questions, but if folks need it on the screen, yeah.
So I'll let you cover half of this, but regarding the project management plan, all of the documentation that you're seeing is being pulled from the contracts and the working documents that we have already in place under the project site that our collective teams have been working on. So that project management plan, first and foremost, takes into account change management. So what you're going to hear us talk a lot about is the impact to the user community and the business office operations of state government. We're confident that we have made good technology choices, but the challenge and the risk that you had heard before is really in the people side. So people process technology is a tried and true project management model. We need to really focus on the people and the process, because we do anticipate that process is going to change dramatically for the better in the state. So that change management plan, the communication management plan, which I think is not something that we've actively been hearing about when it comes to IT projects, along with the requirement management plan. So there is a major effort that happens in the first phase of the project with multiple partners, both our business process transformation partner and our implementation partner, where we spend months and months of time going through the impact analysis, the business process, the review of current systems, where the gap is, and you'll see in the documentation coming up that is where that data is located.
Yeah, as Secretary Riley Hughes said, the slide that you see in front of you is direct from our contract with the systems implementer. And so it really kind of clearly lays out how we're going to be approaching a variety of these areas. And again, this is for the systems implementer. We're going to talk a little bit later about our business process transformation contractor. which is, will be engaged with across state government and kind of doing that gap analysis, that business requirements gathering.
So, and I just want to point out in here, when you look at the description of each one, and I think that this was a really great guide, making sure that we have the right resources at the table is going to be critically important. And so each one of these steps is a measured step that is going to have documentation associated with it. It's going to have output associated with it. But then you start looking at both procurement management and quality management. We're not going to go live with something that is not going to meet the needs. The user community becomes such an active part in those phases. Pre-go live, which is an effective and standard model for these massive projects. Additionally, the risks and the issues. And so all of the independent review that was conducted along with the assessment from JFO, those are things that will be included as part of consideration for both the business process transformation partner and the implementation partner, so that we're not missing something along the way. So everybody's feedback's been really valuable through this process.
And we're really on the cusp of actively getting more of that feedback and input to inform this project. Any project communications is so important. In particular, when you're talking about a transformational project of this nature, which really will be implemented across all of state government and all 3 branches of state government, our plan is, our requirement is that we will be communicating across all stakeholders in state government and across all 3 branches of government. And this is really critical as we prepare for project launch on December 1st. And we have started more of those initial communications, and we'll talk a little bit more about what those are and what will become systematic communications across state government, because one of our end users are all state employees, because this is how we will be doing our payroll, requesting our leave in the future. All of these things will be part of this new system. So we've identified here 4 main communication goals. One is raising awareness to ensure that our employees understand the reason for the ERP transformation and how it will benefit and impact them. We also need to generate engagement across state government, but making sure that we're receiving that input from all of the right employees. We want to motivate our employees to support this change and embrace the new system. It is going to be a big change. We believe it is going to be really valuable to all employees in a way that they'll be able, every employee will be able to see the benefits of it in a way that maybe other implementations haven't in the past. And I'll give an example that I've heard recently from a user of Workday, which is right now across state government, when you want to request leave of any kind, it's really up to your department, up to your manager, how you request that leave and how it's documented. And so I've worked in a lot of different places and it's been handled differently. Going forward, one of the capabilities of Workday is the ability for employees to request the leave in there in the system. They will be able to see the approval of the supervisor, and then it rolls out like onto calendars everywhere. So everybody knows what's happening, all the right stakeholders. I know it's kind of like, it's a small example, but it's something when you think about spreading that across state government, how it's happening today, and think to the future, a way that it could be streamlined. My boss will know like how many times I forget when somebody's out of my office unless I put it on my calendar. So small example, but I think one that's powerful, and hoping that examples like that will help to generate this engagement amongst our employees. We want to ensure readiness across state government, make sure that we're providing the necessary training and resources to prepare and support employees for this transition. And then reinforce the success as we sustain the momentum post-implementation and during implementation, that we're celebrating the milestones and achievements of the project.
Over the last year and a half, the Chief Performance Office, along with members of the Agency of Digital Services, has adopted the ProSci method of change management. It's a scientifically proven model and really focuses on the human side of change in ensuring success, especially in massive transformational projects like this one. And so we are taking that model, and it is going to be used across all of the work effort and both communication to the users, but ensuring that we're ready to go when the time comes for each one of those phases.
Would you say the name of that?
PROSCI, PROSCI. You might hear it when you hear it, like ADPAR is another one. Everybody likes acronyms, but. So we have a couple of folks certified both across AOA and ADS. And we expect that with it being an adopted model within the Chief Performance Office, that we're going to see it come about more as a standard practice across state government.
Business process transformation phases. If you recall, last legislative session, there was a request for additional resources for the ERP project to fund business process transformation. And both from a contracted resources as well as additional state staff to support these efforts. Secretary Riley Hughes and I believe strongly that the business leads with the IT to support. And so it was important to us to allow for the resources to support the business in this significant transformation. The legislature ultimately directed us to use our existing appropriations to fund the business transformation. And so that's what we've done. And as we mentioned earlier, we're on the cusp of being able of executing that contract to facilitate us in those processes with the start date of December 1st. And so what you'll see on this slide is lifted from that contract with the business process transformation partner that will be collaborating with the Agency of Administration, the Agency of Digital Services, and our SI implementer to make sure that we are doing the gap analysis, that we are gathering all of the requirements that we need so that we implement a system that meets the need of state government. And so you can see on this slide the various phases of our contract with the business process transformation vendor, the planning, the current state requirements gathering, future state design, documentation, et cetera, on the page. These efforts are scheduled to kick off on December 1st so that we can begin on this project to be able to bring this system to state government, but also to be able to provide the updates and answer some of the questions that have been identified by the Joint Fiscal Office.
The only thing that I would add to that is this is not just the front end phase. This is, I'm calling it phase 0. So it starts at the beginning and they stay with us through the term of the project. And so this isn't a point in time. This is continuous throughout the project. So this is a snapshot of, we keep on calling it HCM. So human capital management, human resources. It includes human resources, and we have also included the budget piece. So when we look at the risks of our current environment, we have a very small window of opportunity to start this project now. One of the things that we're looking at is specifically the replacement of the Vantage system. That is not a system that we can continue going through more fiscal years with. It is.
Which is our current budgeting system. It's called Vantage system.
Right. Sorry, I think I've talked about this so much.
I know.
So you'll see, this is just a snapshot of each one of the phases with the anticipated start date of that, the month term in which it happens. And we're looking at about 25 months for HCM and budget to take place and be complete. This is all based on the contract as well. So once the contract is signed, this information is available. The second phase would be finance, and you can see all of the different components going into ensuring success with the financial implementation. And Secretary Clark really said it, and I think that it needs to be understood and known that the business requirements of the users and the impact to the users and the change management is leading this effort. That's the biggest part of it. We do understand that it's going to take a lot to implement the tech, but the tech cannot drive the business process change. It really needs to be the business process change has to influence the configuration of the technology. We're confident with the solution that we picked. We're confident with the SI partner and their experience in this space to lead us. They understand the challenges that we have collectively as a state. They bring a wealth of experience with them to the table, and focusing on the impact is going to be, I think, one of our guiding principles. I shouldn't say I think, but it's one of our guiding principles to ensure project success. The governance.
Yeah, governance, as on any project, governance is very important, and ERP is no different. And so, though hard to read on the page, unless you have glasses, this is the high level framework for what our governance structure is on this project. I think it's important to understand that this continues to evolve and be updated to reflect considerations that are brought forward to us from all of our partners. And so some of the recent developments is to make sure that our executive steering committee, so Denise and I are the executive co-sponsors of this project. We have an executive steering committee that supports us in those endeavors. And that includes both of us, as well as my critical business partners, Commissioner Fastigi from the Department of Human Resources, Commissioner Gresham, who was here earlier, who is the Commissioner of Department of Finance and Management. He had to leave for a budget meeting because we are in the midst of that right now. As well as Denise and her, Mark Combs, I'm going to get titles wrong, but the
CTO, Chief Technology
Chief Technology Officer to the table on the steering committee. Historically, the Agency of Human Resources, the Agency of Human Services has also had a seat on our steering committee as the biggest agency in state government. It's really critical that it is represented, and it has been. We've recently updated our governance to include the Agency of Transportation on the steering committee, as well as the Department of Labor, because they will be critical, obviously, as we look to those specific systems for replacement in the future. And as you drill down into the governance hierarchy, you will see more and more agencies and departments represented, depending on the tier. So I will highlight, and for me on the paper, it looks like lavender, lilac, light purple. I'm not sure what boxes, what those colors are for all of you. But those are the levels where we're really going to see the subject matter experts across state government and all of the stakeholders across state government. And so that's where I would expect at a minimum to be engaging with the judiciary and the legislative branch to make sure that we are receiving their input in those areas. And then the rest of the boxes, we could talk about all of them, but it's meant to the project leadership team, which will be responsible for more of the kind of day-to-day leadership on the project. That's the green boxes. Down to the blue boxes where as you go down through this governance structure, you get more and more detailed in terms of what you're looking at and what is the input that will be provided. So in those 3 blue boxes, kind of in the middle of the page, you've got our federal requirements advisory group. And that's where we're really going to see across state government, a lot of the agencies and departments providing their input in terms of what are the requirements for their respective areas. So the Agency of Agriculture, Agency of Natural Resources, making sure that we are capturing the requirements and input that we need. Then there's also the Financial Functional Advisory Group and the Technical Advisory Group. And this can evolve as we move forward. We want to make sure that we are getting the right input and support that we need for this project.
And I would just want to say, as we go through the first few months of, and I think it's up to 6 months of the requirements gathering and planning, that this is when we will identify and find, and when I say we, I don't mean Secretary Clark and myself, I mean the folks from the project team, the implementation partner, the business process transformation partner, to identify where it makes sense to bring in the legislative resources or leads, I guess you would say, as well as judiciary. Because if there are existing systems today that exist on either side, we want to make sure that those are represented properly. So although you said lavender, I think that that's a given. We know that's going to be the case, but the blue is also likely an area that we may see some committee membership outside of the executive branch. And obviously the change management side, I think that's going to incorporate every user in state government. So this was taken out of the independent review that you received last week from John Kelly. It was redacted just because it's not signed. I mean, I shouldn't say it was signed. It was signed. It is because it names the implementation partner. So we have elements of that redacted. The full version is going to be available as soon as the contract is signed. But this is based on a 10-year life cycle cost. That was the original estimate. These are aspects, and I just want to make sure that we're clear too, is that we're not asking for additional appropriations today. We are just looking for approval on the release of the second appropriation. And we do anticipate that there will be costs, but this has been a fascinating 2 years for me because not all technology spend comes through the Agency of Digital Services. So we don't have visibility into a lot of the external systems, although we're talking about 5 main core legacy systems. What we don't have full access to is all of the other ancillary systems that either have been around for a long time or don't. We may see a signature come through, but based on our limited access of reporting in the current system, there's no means to easily do that. It would probably take a couple of years of analysis, which the good thing is we're going to take care of that in this report because we anticipate that transparency is going to be one of the critical outcomes of putting a system like this in place. We can't effectively run state government on spreadsheet. And it does not give us a full comprehensive view, which is also where when you look at what the current annual operating costs of the existing environment is, there's a little warning symbol there because it does not include the cost of SARS and FARS. It does not include the cost of hardware replacement or a replacement life cycle. It also doesn't include any of the ancillary support costs, which also include, given that the system is end of life, any unexpected federal updates that happen in order to provide folks with their tax documentation at the beginning of the year. Those are unplanned, unanticipated additional costs. So I believe that number is more like 3 to 4x that cost, but not a lot of that is going through the ADS business office.
So in summary, on the ERP transformation project, I tried to kind of break it down. We've got the business process transformation partner, which we're planning to execute that contract and kick off on December 1st, 2024. That contract will be held by the Agency of Administration. I say that because the system's implementer partner, that contract also will be executed. I'm hoping to start implementation on December 1st. That's the plan. That contract will be held by the Agency of Digital Services. So I think underscoring the partnership between the business and the technology and our respective experts and the need to collaborate and work together. And as we've already discussed, there's really 2 phases to this project. Phase 1 is the human capital management. Shortly after that will be phase 1B, the budgeting replacement, and phase 2 are the financials.
We don't get a lot of time to really talk about, well, then where do we go from here and what are the commitments that we're making between Secretary Clark and I. We anticipate that we will be testifying in front of our committee of jurisdiction, whatever it looks like come next session. And the session after that, and the session after that, and the session after that, in as much detail as we have available to us to provide you with the progress, the impact, the unanticipated elements, because any project of this magnitude is going to have unknowns, and we expect there to be unknowns. I think that we have uncovered as many as we possibly can and got all of the right folks involved to be able to ensure that it's minimized. But transparency and communication is going to be critical here. And that includes what we identified through that first phase of discovery. That needs to be clear, it needs to be available, and it needs to be transparent to the committee, along with users, agencies, departments, business offices. We do have a focus around prioritizing that gap analysis. And that is something that was built into the onset of the RFP, along with the contract that we have ready to sign with our implementation partner. And it was the prime focus of the business process transformation as well. Because the gap analysis isn't just limited to existing legacy systems. The gap analysis is also focused on business process because we don't have a lot documented. Everybody does something different, and that does not provide for equity and consistency and actually creates greater risk for the state government based on what we have in place today. Aligning our test strategy with Workday recommendations, it is unusual for an organization to purchase a test tenant prior to implementation completion. And so if that is something that is decided through this process that the state needs, we fully anticipate that being an option and being available to us. But we would not deliver something like that today because the existing start of this project has a number of tenants that allow us to do that in that testing configuration mode pre-implementation. The comprehensive data management plan, we did contract, or we plan to contract with the implementation partner to do a lot of the front end support of that. But we have a very strong data and cloud team within ADS. So we anticipate pulling a lot of that work in-house to be available. And we will work in conjunction with the SI partner, but it is not something that we're going to fully contract out for. I was going to say farm out. That's probably the wrong analogy, but we're not going to pay a premium on that when we end up having to be the source to support that long-term across the state. The chart of accounts, I would say that is actually one of the critical components on the onset of this project to fix. It is blocking us from doing a number of things within state government. And although I've not been around for a lot of them, I think the SSDDMS, everything is an acronym. So it was the education school district project that the state was trying to offer them a standard comprehensive single system to be able to manage their budgets from. And the current state of the chart of accounts is one of the critical findings as to why it couldn't move forward in the anticipated mode and model. So that is something that's going to get fixed out of the gate.
And that is a significant piece of work. And I just want to be clear about that.
But yes,
Because
I'm not
you're not,
underestimating.
she's not underestimating, but I want, because
I
I
know
think
it's
that's for financial staff or accountants, it's really, it will be a dramatic change. And we want to make sure that the chart of accounts design will meet the needs of state government, but it'll be the good of the whole before the good of the individual department, because we need a system that works statewide so we can have a true enterprise system and not just meet the unique needs of each individual department, which in some ways in the state of Vermont, when Vision, our current accounting system, came into to be, I think that there were compromises that were made that have held us back in terms of some of our ability looking across state government. So significant piece of work, but really transformational.
The mitigating integration risks, that is something that as you look back at the prior slides, as we go through each one of those phases, that's going to be critically important. And it is not lost on our SI partner. It's not lost on Workday or on the comprehensive project team. I think there, obviously, in any major change like this, there is a little bit of fear of the unknown. We don't know what it's going to look like, but the outcome and the way that it's structured around ensuring communication and the right folks are at the table, I do anticipate that we are going to mitigate those risks. Not moving today is a greater risk to the state long-term, both cost-wise and foundationally. The commitment to ongoing testing is really focused on the concerns that if we don't have the right environments in place, that should be resolved by the end of the 4-year implementation project. I would anticipate that we will present and provide updates on that as it becomes available, but that is not something that I would consider to be a concern today. So, thank you. I know, I understand that this is scary, and I understand that folks have been working on this for a long time. So there's a lot of behind the scenes conversations. There's a lot of concerns and challenges based on what was, what is, what could be. And I'm confident with the partnership that we have aligned with our team and with us, that with AOA and ADS being the two service agencies for state government, that we are well positioned to include everyone and to have this be a successful project, because not one of us owns this in its entirety. We have to work together on this, and the technology is not going to lead the business. The business is going to lead the technology. So I don't have any other, I think that's it. Sorry.
Discussion and questions.
I have like 15 pretty massive questions. First, why was the procurement process deviated from the standard state IT procurement procedures, and what were the implications of purchasing the software before defining the business requirements?
I was not working for the state at the time, but I do know through all of the documentation that I had available to me is that there was a comprehensive review done on what the requirements are from a technology standpoint. Cloud, we are a cloud first state. We actually, within a matter of a couple of months, will be out of the data center business because we will be in a fully managed service model for the legacy systems. Secure, and a one that aligns to the security standards and security models under ADS and the state of Vermont. There were a few other, and I don't want to call my CTO to the table because he was around for this. My understanding from what was determined is that the former CIO has the authority to choose technology. The procurement was done so in a valid model, and I shouldn't say model, but RFP approach. So it was RFP'd through NASPO, and it was done so. My words aren't working on Monday. It was done so.
A legitimate path to
Yeah,
procurement.
exactly.
There is an avenue for non-standard procurement within state government.
A clarifying question on that, because I thought that when JFO presented, they said that there were docs that were missing, including workday contracts in the RFP done by NASPO.
No, it's all provided in there.
I was referring to, it wasn't part of what was considered by the CIO's internal review. Correct.
So the partner who conducted the independent review for the implementation project is a partner that has quite a bit of experience in implementing ERP systems, and they also have quite a bit of experience on the ERP side. I'm not sure what they meant by that. This did come up in our final review where they presented the findings, they presented the risk, and the documentation was in there. I think that they hadn't done a full, I shouldn't even speak to, I don't know why that was said, but that documentation has been fully available.
Let me hear from JFO.
In the independent review, they said they did not have access to that information. What they did have access to was NASPO. If you sign on to be part of their contract as a state, you can actually negotiate your own pricing with the vendor. Now, the pricing through NASPO was separate for the HR and the different modules. It was separate. So separate pricing so what John Quinn did was he put out another RFP and just asked for bidders that were certified under the cloud services agreement for NASPO to submit pricing for Workday as the whole package, not just by module. And so that was the document that was included in the independent review in the document list. And it was on the site, and it was listed as the NASPO bid document, but it didn't include the actual original RFP for the cloud services vendor or the contract with Workday. And they stated in their contract, they didn't have access to those documents. So it was, I mean, I don't think it was intentional. I think but the independent reviewer did identify that.
All right, next one. What is the timeline for completing the business requirements and gap analysis, and how confident are you in the ability of Workday to meet Vermont's needs without extensive customizations?
The nice thing is that you can't customize Workday. It is a true cloud SaaS platform, but you can configure it. And there is a difference, and the difference comes in the form of when updates happen, you're updating incrementally and not massive change. And that's one of the elements that's holding us back in some of our legacy systems, is that we have over customized it, and it limits us from being able to adopt the current versions. So I don't anticipate it being a challenge for us. I think that we are going to fare just fine in that.
How will gaps identified during implementation be addressed, and what budgetary impact is expected from potential change orders? And just referencing to this, when we saw the ERP transformation project cost slide, you said it'd be 3 to 4x of the shown costs that aren't under ADS's purview. Will this be figured out at this time? And if not, what was the report that you were referring to that you'd be able to figure out what the transparency data was that you didn't have access?
So I think what you're referring to is the little asterisk on the current system. So the 3 different modules that we have in place today, plus
I mean, that's part of it, yeah.
plus the 37 other systems sitting across the business offices that they're using for finance or HR function. That should come out both through the BPT first phase and the base camp, which is that first phase of discovery in HCM. We have a second base camp that happens in the finance piece, but I anticipate that we're going to find what those are first. And I think there were like 3 or 4 questions wrapped into one. So I want to make sure that we have.
I heard estimating cost of change orders.
Oh, so we have a contingency.
Yes,
We have
that's what I was
quite a
gonna say.
contingency built into, seems like quite a, but a reasonable one to account for possible change orders, given what we know about the current systems, and I would say limited information on the business process, that I don't anticipate major changes. And don't forget too, those systems are already being funded in a maintenance and operations phase today through the various business offices, which if you cut over, is that a way of finding cost savings for the state?
Are you gonna add anything?
Sorry.
I know, I know.
Write down the questions. Make sure we hit them.
I'm curious, since the business requirements and gap analysis are being done at this stage versus the very beginning, what happens if the end of the gap analysis and business requirements gathering, the findings show that the state shouldn't move forward with Workday as a solution? Especially since you can't do customizations and maybe it won't fit.
That's not going to be, that's not the approach that we're taking. Yeah, it's not uncommon for the software to be procured before the implementation begins, or even before the implementation partner is selected. That's common practice, whether it's preferred by individuals or not, it is common practice. Workday, from a function standpoint, will meet the HCM and finance needs and budget needs of state government. Whether or not we find an ancillary requirement that is not uncovered and has not been shared through Agency of Administration or Agency of Digital Services under both the services budget or the technology, I think we would be shocked to find that, but I don't anticipate it not meeting the needs, and that's really not the question. I think at hand, I think with the stars and bars, there's a UIM project underway right now where there is quite a bit of that back-end business process being rolled into the unemployment insurance project. There is a financial component, which speaks to the compliance requirements that the blue periwinkle phase, where they'll be included in that as well. But I'm not expecting major discoveries that were not already uncovered before.
And it's my understanding that it's leading practice for a lot of projects similar to this, that the systems implementer will be working with their clients, be it a state or otherwise, to do that requirements gathering and gap analysis as part of that initial phase of the project. Vermont is not atypical in that.
Can I ask just a side question based on this, because I'm curious to the JFO team if they also feel based on previous IT projects that skipping the business requirements and gap analysis and doing it at this implementation phase is typical for our state projects.
I would say no. I disagree with that assertion. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't have software in mind, but actual contracting with them before the project starts, I believe, is unusual because you do risk the types of gaps that we've had in this project where you're paying for licensing that you're not using or subscriptions that you're not using. So I would disagree with that.
I will caveat my statement to say it was definitely procured very quickly in advance. I don't think that anybody anticipated us being 3 years post procurement before we could be at a point where we have an implementation ready to kick off. There were some considerations taken into account. And if you look at that spreadsheet, originally, I believe that, and again, I wasn't here, so it was ARPA funding that was available, and it was for modernization that this would qualify for. That funding was turned into general fund.
Yeah, in the budget
And
adjustment.
in the budget adjustment, correct. So that factored into the urgency of getting the licenses procured at a significant discount, and I think procured under a 10-year timeframe. But the 10-year aligns to Bulletin 3.5, and we're also seeing 10 years as being a pretty common timeframe for major procurements like that.
And I want to say Denise and I, I'll refer to you in the first person, first name, stressing the importance of the business and its input, which is why we came to the legislature last year, budget adjustment with the request for funding for business process transformation to really make sure that we are representing the needs of the entire enterprise, both the business and the technology.
Can I ask JFO to respond to that?
I do want to clarify that part of, we've talked about this before, how our current team inherited this decision. And this was made before they came into practice. And I think what complicated the matter, it wasn't necessarily the fact that it was a NASPO bid process. It was what the bid was. It was for identifying cloud services solutions. So that could be hosting, data, cloud services, whatever. Systems that met the NASPO, the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cloud Services criteria. So it wasn't a bid that assessed ERP solutions done by NASPO. So that made it even more complicated because you didn't have all of the requirements that were normally part of an RFP. There were some, but they were, this was something that they inherited. So normally all of these requirements that you identify and you develop the RFP, they cascade down into your scope of work and your requirements. And, by the time it comes to contracting, it gets pretty easy, but they didn't have the benefit of having that. So that complicated it.
Okay. So at previous meetings, we were told that the current systems would not be able to be updated, which is why new software was being investigated. However, this summer in September, the payroll systems were upgraded, I believe it was payroll, in an urgent manner. Will the gap analysis be completed based off of the most current version after being upgraded urgently, or did the upgrades affect what is necessary? Are there further impossible updates that could be implemented rather than jumping to a completely new software?
No, we cannot update to meet the needs of what we're talking about in state government with the current system. If we were to move to a current version under the same platform per se, let's say, we would be going through the same effort. It would still be a massive transformation project, and it would be as if it were a new product. The update that happened was an update from a version 9.1 to a 9.2, and it was required under federal requirements. And it cost the state a significant amount of money. And if we don't have those updates available, like I said, we would risk further costs like that, unanticipated costs like that based on the current system. And I know I've said this before in testimony, the current system is end of life. It moved to end of life well over a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, depending on which version you're talking about. And there are a lot of strict requirements that have to be met in order to consider it to be available under support. And we don't meet any of those. So we have a high risk environment today.
Absolutely have anything on camera.
She doesn't have a hand up.
Okay,
but,
good, okay. So moving on to technical implementation concerns, how does the absence of a dedicated implementation tenant align with Workday's recommendations for a project of this scope? If an implementation tenant was added, what are the short-term and long-term costs that we heard about as being options?
We have 2 implementation tenants, so I'm not really sure what that.
Like I think it was like missing the sandbox.
So what it is I think I spoke about this earlier, the test tenant. So that would be a post-go-live test environment, which in 4 years from now, if we so choose that meets the state's requirements based on the knowns, then we have the opportunity to put that in place. It would not be in our best interest to be buying that now because we're not live. We're going to be working in our multiple, let's call it implementation environments today.
And what were the short-term and long-term costs? There was a mention of there would be different pricing depending on what was chosen.
I'm not sure what that would look like in 4 years from now. I do know that Workday has worked very closely with us, and they have, last year with the concern that we were paying for a 3rd year of licenses, that they deferred that at no penalty to the state. So we didn't pay for the licenses last year. They've been very forthcoming as a partner to support us. So I'm really not concerned, but we can pull some numbers together.
I mean, you'd present those numbers without actually signing on to that, I'm assuming.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. And that should be all in the documentation. That should be part of all of that information, communication, transparency. Yes.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, the recommendations that I noted also, they were post-implementation concerns on what the plan was and conversations about testing and what type of testing was required for the state moving forward for the long-term planning for the state. And that's why it was included. So I have no concerns with what they said. And I remember asking about the current pricing when I spoke to Workday, and it was definitely achievable. It wasn't like buying the initial subscription at all, nothing like that.
If you've got a follow-up, go ahead. Otherwise, I'd like to.
Yeah, definitely.
Really a chance.
Yeah, thanks. Just a question kind of following up on Rep. Priestley's question around short and long-term costs. Just how do you recommend or foresee the legislature being able to do their job in a timely fashion of ensuring that this project is funded and also that we give it due consideration and are able to meet with the administration on this going forward?
So when you, Representative Sebelia, say allow the legislature to do their job, you mean in terms of appropriating sufficient funds to support the project? And so I think, it's weird that you're behind me, but I think I'm going to turn and not face you so you can see my face. I I think as in any project like this where the legislature appropriates and directs the executive branch to do something, the onus is on us to come back to you when we need additional funding to support the project and making sure that you have enough time to be able to respond to those requests. And so as an example, last year, Secretary Riley Hughes and I identified the need for additional funding to support business transformation efforts. And so we came to the legislature with that request. And, you know, now we are on the cusp of kind of executing that contract after a pretty lengthy RFP process to make sure that we were capturing everything appropriately.
And if I might follow up, Mr. Chair.
Please.
And also just checking in, I guess, with Lisa, you know, how should we think about what is an appropriate schedule so that the administration can move forward and do so in a timely fashion and we can do our job? I mean, have we thought about this? Is this part of your review process? Can this be part of your process going forward?
It was included in the report as some thoughts on oversight considerations and some recommendations. So based on the fact that I would say the majority of the serious findings are related to the lack of requirements that were identified at the state. We identified when the state said they would have response to these, and we put them in as a way to be a possible path forward should you decide to move ahead with the project. So I think it is important, and I appreciate the support and the feedback when we were drafting these at JFO. It makes sure that you have some options, and the actual actions are based on where we saw the risk. And it includes getting more information from, as Denise was talking about, this being a business-driven project, by hearing from business people around the same time, because they can speak to how the system is meeting their needs in a unique way. Whereas we've been hearing from our two leaders here, which is great, but it would be great to hear from our business owners too.
Yeah, and I think that is a fair consideration. And our goal and plan is that you will see that business participation and other business leaders through the information that we provide to Lisa, the JFO IT consultant, and thereby to the committee, is that you will see that progress and that work happening. We do, there is an MOU that governs the relationship and the exchange of information between the Joint Fiscal Office and the Agency of Digital Services, so that Lisa, we are fortunate that she has access to all of the materials that are available on the project. And so I think we can make sure that is continued to be updated and timely, and make sure when there are updates that Lisa is aware of them so that she's able to go in and review, which is hard because it is a lot of information. So the kind of continual updating that Lisa, I think you referenced earlier about the business transformation partner, that contract is out there now, but no, I haven't called you to tell you that it's there and can you take a look? And so I think that's something that we can, I don't really have time for that anymore, but just making sure we can figure out a process that it's not secretary is kind of directing that communication, but we'll figure out that process.
And although Lisa does have access to the SharePoint site, I think that speaks to what you're talking about, is that there are 1,600 something like that documents in there in various forms, and that is too excessive for her to assume that something's been updated. So
yeah,
we need to make sure that we build that into our communication plan as well.
And if I might, Mr. Chair, I just have one more question.
Please.
So given that, and also given that we're about to enter a new legislative biennium with a brand new legislature, lots of new members, is there what should this committee know about the likely timeframe of when we'll need to check in again, or you will have additional information for us about future appropriations and progress?
Are you asking us or the chair?
I'm asking you. Sorry, Secretary Clerk. Sorry, not sorry.
I do think, you know, it's typical from a budgeting perspective, the budget adjustment, and then the FY 26 budget development process. But at this point in time, we are not anticipating requesting additional appropriations in this biennium. And so we want to kind of dig in, get started on the work, provide the updates and the information. And then it'll be, as we know more, it'll be a future conversation, but we're not expecting a request in the 2025 legislative session.
Okay, great.
Did you say 25 only or 25 or 26?
The whole session. So I don't anticipate that we're at this point in time asking for any money for this upcoming session.
If I can just speak. I
The
would,
biennium or the session? So
The session, 2025 session.
I think the chair asked 2025, 2026.
I was speaking to budget adjustment and FY 26. So like we come in and testify to build a budget adjustment for FY 25 and then the FY 26 build.
Basically the next 12 months.
Yes.
and that was what I was going to speak to, is that if we do have through the first 6 months of business process transformation, let's call it first 5, because it'll be May. If we have some reporting around what we anticipate would be additional costs, I would be very happy to share that with JFO, with the consultants. So if we do need to get in front of the committee to share any further progress, not asking for the funds, but at least prep for the following session for the FY 26 session, then I would like to do so. That'll keep the communication open and relevant.
I won't be part of that committee, but I would strongly recommend. I know there's been a lot of opportunities for you know, if we had it to do all over again, things we could have done differently. So the more corroboration and teamwork, as you mentioned in your presentation, that we can have and facilitate, I think that'll make future process go much smoother and it bring the project up to a higher level of proficiency and hopefully performance.
Plan.
Representative, do you have any further follow-up on that, or?
Yeah, I do have one more question, if I might.
Okay.
Just for Secretary Riley Hughes, last year, it seems to me that we need to have, the legislature should be having kind of regular check-ins with ADS about the status of IT projects at both the high level and the more in-depth level. And I'm not aware, did you have any kind of high level, here's all of our projects that we have going on last year with any of the standing committees of jurisdiction outside of Jitoc?
We have 102 active projects going on that EBMO is managing through ADS, and various ADS resources are connected to. So it's pretty extensive. The EBMO website gives the list of all of those and their current status from an IT mod funds. And I think that was how we had first started the conversations at Jitoc, was about what's going on in the IT mod space. We are within weeks of getting the contract signed on our network modernization project. I just did a final review with the independent review on the fire safety case management system. And there's a whole host of little ancillary projects here and there that have come up through that, but we have nothing new coming in requesting on IT mod that I'm aware of. But when you talk about that, the committees of jurisdiction, I think that we're seeing a lot of changes happening around either replacing systems, federal requirements coming forward. And so we may see these spattered outside of what is being requested as IT mod funds. You may be seeing this in the Health and Human Services space around child welfare, around integrated eligibility. And so my team is very heavily involved in that process, but it's very early stages right now. whether or not it's components of open RFP at the moment versus pending RFP release as well. So there is a lot of work going on. We'd like to see that 102 drop dramatically, get a lot more manageable, both from a fiscal planning and impact and change management, but also there's been a lot of IT mod funds that have been allocated towards projects that are making a big impact, like the UIM project is well underway. The staff is, they kicked off a couple months ago, and that is going very well right now. The DMV modernization project, they just had an internal demo that they demoed where they're at right now in the process on the licenses, the driver's licenses, and it's going extremely well. They're on track. And I'm happy to come back and give a little bit more detail and bring in those commissioners or secretaries depending. But if there's something specific that you want me to focus on, let me know.
Thanks, Secretary Riley Hughes. I guess I would just, as an aside to this conversation about this IT project, just note for Jitoc that I think it was an excellent recommendation that came forward from the Scott administration to develop the Agency of Digital Services to have that kind of oversight over all IT in the state. And I want to remind us that our job in the legislature is also to provide oversight and a check and balance to the administration. And I'm not sure that we have got that balance right. That we're able to support and ask questions and plan with the administration in a timely fashion. And so I would just offer that as something for us to think about going forward. Thank you. I will have to drop off in about 10 minutes. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can either of you give me an idea of what the sunk costs are right now? If we stop the project now, how much has been spent on this?
I think should never spitball the number, but I believe it's between $3 and $4 million in terms of the license costs. Some
Under
$3 million.
And then the project management.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
about 4.
Yeah, it's about 4. Yeah.
Contract was signed, back in May of 22 for 28 something million dollars. Is there a way to get out of that contract?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think we'd have to do an analysis if what would the impact be, getting out of that workday contract, I believe is what you're referring to.
Yes, and, did I hear someone say that that was all the money and that's one of the reasons it was sort of fast tracked to spend it?
That is, so based on where it first came from, yes, that was the first appropriation was ARPA, and so it had a timestamp to it in that same time frame. From my understanding, again, it goes from my understanding, is that it was moved under general fund during a
In
BAA
budget
process,
adjustment, it was
budget
moved to
adjustment.
general fund, so it's, that is the resulting appropriations. There are 2 appropriations, one for 12.8 million of general fund dollars to the Agency of Administration, and for 11.8 million of IT modernization funds to the Agency of Digital Services. So,
But the total money that was
24
from ARPA was actually 24.
It wasn't, there was no ARPA money on this project. Yep.
No, that was,
Yeah, I
I
think
was just speaking to, that was where that first appropriation amount came out of, was it was originally.
Yeah, it originally started, I don't know if I was at the joint fiscal office at the time, but it was one of those, like, we appropriated from ARPA and then there was, I think, general fund available at year end. And so like the appropriation
Yeah.
source changed. And because the ARPA funding had a timeline, a very clear timeline, I think ultimately it's better to be able to, and we have the ability to switch to general fund. Yeah.
And I think, I mean, it's important to note, and I think we've said that, is neither of us were here at the time. We weren't even part of the project. I wasn't with the state. but we've both come into this. You've been on the project for just over a year. I've been on the project for just under 2. The avenue of just stopping versus living with what we have at the risk of additional multiple years of trying to get to the point that we're at right now. That alternative is far greater of a risk for the state, especially given that with the Vantage system, the budget system, it is on, let's call it duct tape and Band-Aids is what's holding it together. We're on extended contract with the provider. They no longer are supporting that product any longer, and they are living year to year with us on the anticipation that we are going to remove that. That it's that entire system at immense risk. Same with the current system today. And we've had a chance to review where we're at, and the current platform that the state has procured, being Workday, is a sound, reliable enterprise system that we've now watched the state of Georgia, the state of Washington, and the state of Rhode Island move to. I think Rhode Island's live on the HCM piece, and they're getting ready to launch this by the end of this fiscal year on the finance piece. We are very well in touch with them. I'm confident that we picked a solution that meets the needs of state government in Vermont. And I also believe that we picked an SI partner that brings a vast amount of experience with them that is going to be what we need to make this happen. And I would just say that same thing, and I don't want to speak for you on the business process transformation, allowing that to lead this process on both the SI and the independent partner is what's going to help us get to end.
May I ask what Vantage is doing? Are they going out of business, or do they have a new package that they've transferred their other customers to? I mean, surely they can't leave every customer that currently uses Vantage or has used Vantage.
It's the name of the product, not the vendor who created it. It is a highly customized environment, and it is not movable to a current version of the system. And so we're on a legacy. So my CTO just raised his hand behind you because he knows a lot more about it than I do.
Yeah, they're actually.
You have to introduce
them CGI.
Can you introduce
Oh,
yourself?
I'm sorry, for the record, my name is Mark Combs. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the Agency of Digital Services. So Vantage was purchased not long ago by a company called CGI. CGI is also an implementer in this space. They do Workday implementations as well. So when we've spoken to them, they were actually more interested in helping us in our journey to moving to Workday than to, what was going to be the loss of the Vantage, support contract. So.
Interesting.
And I would like to try to bring this conversation in for a landing while we've still got Representative Sibilia. So if there's any additional quick questions or clarifications, please.
I'm curious about disaster recovery. I don't see that a module for that or something. How do we deal with the unknowns that are out there?
I'm gonna let Mark answer that because we got really excited about you asking that question. Go ahead.
So because it's a software as a service cloud-based solution, the disaster recovery is baked into it. So that behind the scenes, they're managing all of the moment by moment replication of our data and our transactions and putting it in place. So, if one environment or one area goes down, like say, the East Coast data center, they can bring it up in the central and there's no lost data.
Okay. Do you have?
No, I'm gonna.
Just a quick question. We talked about a lot of technicalities. Let's go to generalities. Lisa, what could go wrong?
Everything that I mentioned. I mean, that's what I'm supposed to do with my job, is to identify what the risks are for these projects. So it costs that change orders that were, unanticipated work has to be done. Gaps that can't be filled if we need to replace, if we can't use Workday for stars and/or cars, there's considerable cost to that. And then there's just the risk that because there were no a complete list of as-is business requirements, and I'm not talking about, kind of the detailed waterfall, like what color wallpaper do you put in a room, down to that detail, but I'm talking about because there's no major functional requirements. How do you know something's missing and what if it turns up at the very end? And that's what happened with a recent failure in Nevada, where they lost $90 million just from to go live where they canceled the project. So it's my job to advise you on kind of the risks to it. The question, I'm heartened by the fact that they have, the state has said that they will use the information in the independent review and my analysis to mitigate risks. And I think that's the best you can do at this stage.
Now, and the issue of accountability and the ability to pull a plug or make a change, assuming that we did what the agency want us to do. How comfortable are you that that is in fact doable to at least minimize the amount of risk?
I know I'm not singling you out, but I know in the preferred implementation vendor contract, there's a cancellation clause and it's at convenience. So they could cancel the contract if they found some unexpected cost that put the contract in jeopardy.
And you believe that we have the mechanism to know that that is happening without adding something specific as requirements to the agencies?
I saw the clause, so.
Well, the issue of accountability comes up often, as you know, in state government, in which something goes wrong and nobody is looking at it until it's beyond the point that we should have been aware of it.
And I think that's why, working with the staff at JFO, we identified some oversight considerations to give you some, sense of ease that will be monitored. And we hope state works with us on that to provide the information in a timely manner. So if they're saying that they'll know when, they'll have the gap analysis at that time, that if it's not there, then we'll be voicing concern.
And are you established in such a way that you can independently do that to come to us if an issue like that develops?
I could definitely reach out based on the typical avenues through JFO to raise issues, whether it's at committees or Jitoc.
Sorry, I'd like to take the vote on the release of funds. I know Rep. Sibilia has to go. Are you
I'm fine.
content? Okay. I would entertain a motion.
Yeah, so I move to approve funding with a very strong recommendation to the money and relevant committees of jurisdiction that they attach JFO's full recommendations to future funding requests.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Second, okay. Any further discussion or questions? Perfect. Senator Brock,
Yes.
Representative Priestley,
Yes.
Representative Sibilia,
Yes.
Senator Weeks is not with us. Senator Renner,
No.
and I'm a yes. Perfect. Thank you. Representative Sibilia, I know you've got to bounce. Does anybody else have any further questions for today?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I know that we will be losing 2 members of this committee, and that we will be switching over from House to Senate governance. It might be, we do have one more meeting, is that right, in December?
The big issue for that meeting was going to be this topic.
Right.
I could go either way based on what the committee's requirements are for if we keep that December 13th meeting, or if we just let new Jitoc kick off in January with a state of the state.
So my recommendation would be to have a very short meeting, if a meeting at all, and for us to focus that meeting on just leaving a note to the next committees. There'll be a lot of shuffle. Sometimes there can be a big length of time before committees get reorganized like this, and sending a letter to the committees of jurisdiction
Okay.
about our work. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I have to leave.
Have a good day. And if we don't have witnesses presenting, maybe we could hold that meeting on Zoom so it can be a little bit more efficient for folks. Okay. Last minute questions?
Oh, so
Comments, concerns,
we're keeping the
points?
13th, but doing quick.
I would like to meet on the 13th. I think there's a number of things we
Yeah.
can cover this year.
The 13th, that works. Perfect.
We're keeping the 13th.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we can.
Could you do like noon or something, like lunch?
I'll look at the schedule
All right,
since we
sounds
get a little
good.
closer. Perfect. Then we can adjourn